This is the sermon for February 26th, 2023, and I'm going to talk about the temptation that Jesus encountered in the wilderness, and I'm going to read Matthew 4, 1 through 11 from the Message. Next, Jesus was taken into the wild by the Spirit for a test. The devil was ready to give it. Jesus prepared for the test by fasting 40 days and 40 nights. That left him, of course, in a state of extreme hunger, which the devil took advantage of in the first test. Since you are God's son, speak the word that will turn these stones into loaves of bread. Jesus answered by quoting Deuteronomy. It takes more than bread to stay alive. It takes a steady stream of words from God's mouth. For the second test, the devil took him to the holy city. He sat him on top of the temple and said, "Since you are God's son, jump." The devil goaded him by quoting Psalm 91. He has placed you in the care of angels. They will catch you so that you don't so much as stub your toe on a stone. Jesus countered with another citation from Deuteronomy. Don't you dare test the Lord your God. For the third test, the devil took him to the peak of a huge mountain. He gestured expansively, pointing out all the earth's kingdoms, how glorious they all were. Then he said, "They're yours, lock, stock, and barrel. Just go down on your knees and worship me, and they're yours." Jesus' refusal was curt. "Beat it, Satan." He backed his rebuke with a third quotation from Deuteronomy. Worship only God, serve God with absolute single-heartedness. The test was over. The devil left, and in his place, angels came and took care of Jesus' needs. That is a beautiful story. It really is. It's filled with humor and startling, memorable details. And it's not a New York Times story. If you could have had a video camera, you could not have videoed it. It's not that kind of history. It's a different kind of history. It's a sacred history. We all go through temptations that are heart-rending. And that's what I want to talk about today. Temptation is not what the world thinks. This story reveals some of what it is. So I've learned a lot in the past year. I've begun exploring things that the intersection between mindfulness and being a follower of Jesus, and mindfulness and self-knowledge, mindfulness and awareness of creation. And these have led me down different paths, which is sad, but also exciting. They take me away from traditional understandings of Christianity. And I've invited you all I've opened some windows for all of you to also explore some of that. I don't know how effectively I've done it. And I myself don't know everything I feel I need to know about this, but I'm on the way. And that's what really matters. I prepared the Ash Wednesday service, which we did Tuesday morning, which was a good thing because the ice storm canceled all kinds of Ash Wednesday activities around. And so I'm glad we did it Tuesday morning. But I realized that the traditional language isn't helpful for being a follower of Jesus. It's more about church tradition, which is hidebound. It's just not as helpful for us today as understanding the deeper reality of ashes and of death. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Many see temptation as good and bad, as sin or no sin, as yes or no. And they think of temptation like the anti-drug thing. Just say no. Yeah, just say no. Life is not that simple. Life is far more shaded and full of complexity. It's not a yes or no question. And so, yeah, it's not black and white. We think I fail constantly and I've got to shape up or what? Or hell, fire and brimstone, right? That's the traditional view. Um, and it's not helpful for church people today, from what I see. And I have a window into people's lives, which is a great privilege, a great honor. And I have a window into my own interior life. And so it matters what we think about temptation and what we think about growing into being a more whole follower of Jesus, a whole human being who follows Jesus. So the kind of black and white and yes and no is really good for people who are involved in ongoing sin. People who are using pornography or dehumanizing others or bullying as a way of life. A lack of self-awareness. For them, yes and no, good and bad, black and white, very important. Even the wisdom literature in the Bible, Proverbs and parts of Psalms and all kinds of wisdom literature. Even in Matthew, there's wisdom literature. That's important for young people who are choosing between a good life and a life that will lead them astray into harm. And so, and for teenagers, for young children, the 2-year-old, yes and no, good and bad, very important. But as we grow into complex adults, and it's very different. It's just not as simplistic. And so I don't personally know people right now who are living that dehumanizing pattern, that bullying as a way of life, that lack of self-knowledge. I don't see much of that, certainly not in the church. What I see in the church are people who are honestly and vulnerably wanting to be better people. And so the simplistic view is not helpful to people who are already on the way and already exploring. But the key is self-knowledge. And I've begun to see Lent and temptations in a different way. There have been times when I followed the rules. In fact, I am a rule follower. I break them strategically because women have to in a patriarchal society. And Christians have to break them periodically for following good rather than less helpful ways of life. But yes and no, good and bad, black and white, that does not help you grow as a Christian. It helps you begin, I guess. And it helps you get out of really sticky situations. But then growth is what will take place if we allow it, if we invite it and welcome it. We're moving toward a sense of integrity and wholeness. When I was simply a rule follower earlier in my life, I was compliant, but I wasn't changed or transformed. That's what I'm looking for now. Other times I claimed particular values, like compassion for the poor, as things that would guide my life, but then I went out and did the opposite of what I claimed to be important to me. This is the point where most Christians are in the churches today. There's a worship of Jesus, there's an admiration of Jesus, but there isn't as much following of Jesus. And that's our struggle. We have to find, where is it that we follow? Sometimes what we're doing exactly, when we're caring for families that are troubled, when we're showing up for people that are hurting, that's following. That's being Jesus to others. It's complicated. We don't see it very often as that is true following of Jesus, but it is. So we're looking for, where is a disconnect between what we say are our values and what we do. Sometimes that happens. It's not enough to just say no. We want harmony between our inner world and our outer world. And I don't think beating ourselves up and saying, I'm not good enough, I'm failing. That's not what God wants. So I begin to think about Lent and those places of struggle, what we call temptations, as moving toward self-knowledge and a new level of being conscious and aware. Again, this is mindfulness. Life in the world just got a whole lot more complicated and potentially more real and more beautiful. I'm looking out the window right now at the sunlight coming through the ice that's still on trees in places, and it's like crystalline beauty. And becoming aware of that is important. And I know that there was destruction, and I know that there were hardships. Many people were without power and without heat, and luckily I wasn't as long as some people. And so, but still, it was hardship. Families took each other in and figured out how to stay warm, and that's important. So think about the times in your life when you've been invited into a greater complexity. There's been a new awareness, a new awakening. You see the world and yourself in a brand new way. More often than not, it seems like a sort of stumbling and falling, a failure, a turning away from God, another, or ourselves. And when that happens, look around and be open to what God is doing. That's the temptation. It's a temptation to fall into what isn't helpful. When we have a new awareness, we might see beauty and goodness. We also see pain and suffering. We see places of wholeness and integrity. When are you drawn forward into a greater wholeness and integrity? Where has it been modeled for you? Always imperfectly. If we're looking at other human beings, it's always imperfect. But we're drawn toward it. We see our contradictions. We know that we're neither all good nor all bad. And that kind of black and white thinking is just not helpful for growth. That's why life is complicated. Jesus goes into the wilderness knowing that he is beloved of God. He goes to the wilderness knowing that he's beloved of God. He draws us forward into a life lived by grace. I think that we often forget. I know I forget that I'm beloved of God, that I start in a state of grace. I start everything in a state of grace. Every day, every new hour, every new attempt at wanting to be whole, at moving toward wholeness, and moving toward becoming love. Before the temptation, Jesus was in a state of grace. Whether Jesus said yes or no to the temptations would not determine the love of God. Grace is always before. This is what's so exciting about being a follower of Jesus. The state of grace is always before anything we encounter, but we forget that. We think we're doing it on our own. Like I say, I'm a 2-year-old. I do it myself. What if I started every complicated and great struggle with knowing that I am beloved of God and in a state of grace? Jesus gained self-knowledge in the temptations. He realized that being in that state of grace, belonging to God, being the love of God for others, meant that he wasn't absorbed in himself. He wasn't absorbed by what he could have or what he could do in terms of power. Instead, it was a humble loving. I think in some ways, he can even love the devil in the story. He can say what's true and not attack. Instead, he says what's true and he simply stands in that grace and in that love. The wilderness is a state of grace for us too. What if we took the next 40 days, well, however many are left of the 40 days from Ash Wednesday, 37 days, whatever it is, and we begin every day and every hour in a state of grace, knowing that we are becoming more of love in the world? What if that is our path of growth? Aware of becoming love for others, becoming love for ourselves, because we begin in the state of grace. Where are the painful and wounded places in us? And do we know and receive God's grace as a healing power in our lives? There are places that we hurt. When we hurt, we tend to live in fear. And fear causes us to lash out. Fear causes us to run instead of to gently move toward. We can breathe deeply. We can breathe in the state of grace and the state of love. When I used to give up something for Lent, I would do it successfully and it would feed my own ego, my own sense of selfish self, self-centered self, rather than capital S self, which is a giving, loving human being made in the image of God. There's a great difference between beginning in a state of grace. I talk with a counselor online each week. It's one of the benefits of having one client in an online service for being a counselor. And sometimes I ask a question of her. Sometimes life has gotten hard and I'll describe what's going on. And she'll ask me, what are you learning about yourself in the midst of this? And what do you need? What do you need? Well, I'll tell you what we all need. We all need grace, and we need the freedom and the awareness and the presence to become love for others. Amen.